The dusty road to dreams. The sky above Chennai was heavy with dust and heat that morning. The kind of morning where everything feels stuck in time, like the world has paused to watch a small story unfold. And at the center of that story was a boy named Sundar. His eyes were too curious for his age, always looking past the rusted tin roofs and narrow alleys, as if he could already see something far away, something no one else around him could. But dreams have a weight in places like this. They feel like stones in your pocket when you're walking through mud. Sundar lived in a cramped two-room house with his father, who worked as an electrical engineer at the British-owned General Electric Company, and his mother, who never raised her voice and never seemed tired, even though she always was. She carried silence like a shawl, wrapped tight around her, warm and protective. Every morning before school, Sundar would walk half a kilometer to fetch milk. He'd carry a steel canister, dented and warm from the early sun. On the way, he'd watch buses rattle by, children running barefoot beside them, the city waking up in shouts and horn blasts. And in the middle of all that chaos, Sundar would think about circuits and machines, not cricket or comic books. He had a strange gift, one that no one really noticed at first. He remembered numbers. Not just remembered them. They lived in his mind, as if his thoughts had wires and switches. One day, something changed. Sundar was 12 when his teacher asked the class to calculate the population increase of India using a basic formula. The numbers were on the blackboard, barely visible through the chalk dust. Sundar didn't just calculate it, he corrected the formula itself. He stood up slowly, his voice soft but steady, and pointed out a missing step. The class went quiet. Even the fan above stopped groaning for a second. His teacher, a man with a permanent frown and thick glasses, looked at him for a long moment. Then he said something Sundar would never forget. "You have a mind like a machine, but don't let it make you forget what it means to be human." Sundar didn't understand it then. He only knew he wanted to learn more, build more, do more. But dreams in his world didn't just require brilliance. They required silence, patience, and something even harder: sacrifice. His father, proud but firm, pushed Sundar to study harder. He'd often come home late, his shirt stained with oil, and sit quietly beside Sundar as he read by a dim yellow lamp. He'd never say much, only nod when Sundar explained something. But his eyes would shine in the dark like tiny stars. His mother, on the other hand, stayed quiet. Always. She'd bring him tea, fold his clothes, pack his school bag, and never ask what he was learning. And yet, it was her silence that gave him strength. It wrapped around him like a wall, keeping doubt and fear away. But then came the first real test. One afternoon, Sundar returned home to find his father sitting stiffly on the edge of the bed. Beside him was a letter. The paper was thin, almost transparent. It was from the Indian Institute of Technology. Sundar had not just qualified, he had ranked among the top 100. The room went silent. His father read the letter again, then folded it very carefully like it might break. He looked at Sundar and said, "We can't afford this." Sundar felt something twist inside him. He nodded, though he didn't feel anything yet. Not sadness, not anger, just silence. His mother stepped into the room. She had a bowl of sliced mangoes in her hand. She didn't ask what the letter said. She didn't need to. She looked at Sundar, placed the bowl beside him, and left the room. The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with everything she didn't say. That night, Sundar lay awake. He could hear the neighbor's television through the thin wall. A soap opera, full of drama and shouting. But all he could think about was the letter, folded under his pillow, and the unspoken question it held. Would he let the weight of reality crush the shape of his dream? A week passed. His father tried everything: loans, letters, visits to distant uncles. Nothing worked. Money was a wall too high, too thick. Sundar began to prepare for Plan B, a local engineering college. Still good, but not it. Then something unexpected happened. His mother, who had not said a word about the letter, suddenly sold her gold bangles. Bangles she had worn on her wedding day. Bangles that had belonged to her mother before her. She walked into the room one morning, placed the money on the table and said, "It's not enough, but it's a start." Sundar stared at her. Not because of what she did, but because she had spoken. He wanted to say thank you. But he couldn't. There were no words big enough. And still, she said nothing more. Just went back to peeling vegetables, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. A few weeks later, with the help of a scholarship and a distant cousin's small loan, Sundar stepped onto the campus of Kharagpur. It was a world of polished buildings, bright minds, and sharp ambition. But beneath all that, Sundar carried the quiet strength of his home, the silence of a mother, the oil-stained hands of a father, the taste of sliced mangoes after disappointment. But, even in a place like Egot, dreams don't grow without struggle. His roommate mocked his accent. Professors doubted his background. Sundar had never touched a real computer before, and the first time he did, he didn't even know how to turn it on. But he learned. Not because he was fast, but because he refused to stop. Every night, he'd stay in the computer lab long after others left, practicing code, reading manuals, typing until his fingers ached. He failed his first programming test, but he didn't let that define him. By the second year, something changed. Sundar became the student. Others came too for help. He began designing better ways to present data, cleaner interfaces. One professor quietly told him, "You see the machine, but you also see the people who use it. That's rare." But life had another twist waiting. One night, as he was preparing for a tech fest, a phone call came, the kind no one expects. Short, sharp, final. His father had collapsed at work. Sundar rushed home. Trains, buses, then on foot. By the time he arrived, the house was full of people. Neighbors, relatives, voices speaking over each other. His father had survived. Barely. A heart issue, the doctor said. Stress, fatigue, age. The quiet kind of damage that builds over years and then breaks all at once. His mother sat by the hospital bed. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just held her husband's hand, eyes closed. Sundar stood there, helpless. He wanted to do something, fix something, but he couldn't. And that's when he made a choice. He would leave it. And then, voice in the shadows. The hospital room smelled like bleach and boiled rice. Faint beeping sounds from a nearby monitor marked time, like a slow, stubborn drum. Sundar stood at the door, his hand resting against the cold metal frame. He hadn't moved since his mother spoke. Her voice still echoed in his head. Not loud, not sharp, but deep, like the earth cracking just a little. She had spoken only a few words, but they had split his certainty in two. "If you do this, you'll never forgive yourself." He turned to her, unsure if he had heard her right. But she didn't repeat herself. She simply looked at him. Her eyes were dry but full, the kind of look that held too many years behind it. Years of cooking on a smoky stove, walking through crowded markets, stretching every rupee, hiding every worry, and smiling through every single one of them. He had come ready to give up everything. He had thought that sacrifice was strength, but now he wasn't so sure. His father lay on the bed, pale and asleep, breathing with effort. Sundar stepped closer, watching the gentle rise and fall of his chest. This man who had carried him on his shoulders as a boy, who had built a career from nothing, who had never asked for praise or pity, now needed help just to breathe. Sundar felt a strange guilt rising in his throat. "Amma," he whispered. "He needs me. I can come back. I'll take care of things. The professors will understand." She sat still, folding the edge of her sari over her wrist. Then, after a long pause, she spoke again. "If you stop now, your father will never recover." He stared at her. "What do you mean?" She didn't answer directly. Instead, she pointed at the drawer in the bedside table. Sundar opened it. Inside was a bundle of letters tied with blue thread. They were old, yellowed, soft around the edges. He untied them gently. They were all written by his father, addressed to companies, universities, banks. Every single one was about Sundar. Requests for loans, for admissions, for sponsorships, even for second-hand books. His father had written dozens of them every week in neat handwriting that grew shakier with time. His mother said softly, "Every letter he wrote with a hope that you would never have to. Don't take that away from him." That night, Sundar stayed in the hospital chair, not sleeping. The lights above flickered once or twice. He watched the shadows move across the floor, and somewhere between those shadows and his mother's words, a decision began to form. Not the kind you make with your mind, but with your spirit. He would go back, not because he wanted to escape, but because he finally understood what his father and mother had built for him. Not walls, not safety, but a bridge. And bridges are meant to be crossed. The next morning, he left a note beside his father's bed. "Appa, I will return stronger. For you, for Amma, for all the letters you wrote when no one was watching," and then, without telling anyone, he boarded the train back to Kharagpur. The journey back felt different. Not like running away, but like stepping into a storm you're no longer afraid of. The train rattled past fields and factories, rivers and ruins. Sundar sat by the window, a worn-out diary in his lap. He made a list. Not of tasks, but of values, things his parents had taught him without ever saying them aloud. Respect, humility, resilience, kindness. 4 words. Simple words. But they were heavier than anything he had learned in class. When he arrived back on campus, he didn't expect a welcome, and he didn't get one. His roommate barely looked up. The professor he admired most said nothing about his absence. It was as if he had vanished for a few days and returned as a shadow. But Sundar didn't care. Not anymore. The silence around him now only mirrored the silence inside him, a silence filled with purpose. He began working harder than ever. He took on extra projects, stayed in the lab past midnight, even taught first-year students for free. His professors started to notice. One of them, a tough man known for rarely praising anyone, called him into his office one afternoon. "You're different," he said, tapping his pen against a folder. "Something happened." Sundar nodded but didn't explain. The professor leaned forward. "There's a competition, international interface design, hosted by a company in California. Google." The word hung in the air like a spark. "You should apply," the professor said. "You think like them." But Sundar hesitated. He had never even left the country. He didn't have a passport. His English wasn't fluent. His clothes were plain. How could he compete with people who had grown up with computers in their bedrooms and parents who were CEOs? He told his mother about it in a phone call. "They're looking for ideas," he said. "I'm not sure if I belong there." Her reply was short. "Do the work. Belonging will follow." So he did. He worked for weeks, designing a cleaner, smarter way to present search results on mobile devices. It was a risky idea, using limited screen space to prioritize human behavior, not just data. He studied how people scrolled, how they tapped, how they paused. He tested with younger students, older professors, anyone who would sit still for 10 minutes. When he finally submitted his entry, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like release. And then he waited. One rainy afternoon, as he sat under the leaky shelter near the lab, sipping a watery cup of tea, an email arrived. Subject: "Congratulations. You've been selected." He stared at the screen, blinking. His hands shook. The teacup slipped and cracked on the floor. His roommate turned and said, "What is it?" But Sundar couldn't speak. For the first time in a long time, he was overwhelmed, not by fear, not by sadness, but by the weight of a door opening somewhere far, far away. He called his mother. When she answered, he didn't say anything for a few seconds. He just listened to her breathing on the other side. Then he said, "Amma, they want me in America." Her response? Just silence. But somehow he knew she was smiling. Getting to America wasn't easy. The visa process was slow. The paperwork never seemed to end. He didn't have the right suit. Didn't know how to write a resume that sounded impressive. He didn't know how to sell himself. He only knew how to do the work. A retired professor helped him, taught him how to talk in interviews. Another student lent him a blazer that was 2 sizes too big. His mother stitched his shirt to make it look newer. When he finally boarded the plane, it was his first time in the air. He watched the clouds below and thought about Chennai, the milk runs, the mangoes, the silence, and he realized something. Every quiet moment, every small sacrifice, every unspoken act of love, it had all brought him here, to this seat, to this sky, to this future. But dreams don't come without a price. In California, the rules were different. People spoke fast, walked fast, thought even faster. Sundar felt slow, invisible, out of place. He got lost on the first day, forgot his badge, spilled coffee on a recruiter's shoes. But he didn't give up. He showed them what he had built, and they listened. And one day, someone important at Google said, "You think like us, maybe better." He was offered a job. He called home that night. His father was still recovering, but stronger now. His mother answered the phone. "They want me," he said. This time, her silence didn't last long. She said 4 words. "Don't forget your roots." And he promised he wouldn't. But as the lights of Silicon Valley twinkled outside his small apartment, a new challenge was already waiting. One that would test everything he believed about power, humility, and truth. Because one day soon, the whole world would know his name. But first, the call that changed everything. The air in Mountain View was dry and clean, carrying the faint scent of pine and pavement. Sundar had learned to walk quickly without looking rushed, to nod politely without giving too much away, to ask questions with care and answer them even more carefully. It had been 6 months since he joined Google, and every day still felt like the first day of school, both exciting and unforgiving. But he was adapting, not just surviving, growing. His small apartment had only the essentials: a desk with his old diary from India, a bed that squeaked when he turned, and a framed photo of his parents next to the window. In the evenings, when the sun stretched long across the bay, he would sometimes sit with a cup of tea and think about Chennai, about the mangoes his mother sliced so neatly, the smell of warm rice, the hum of the ceiling fan, the quiet pride in his father's eyes when Sundar explained something new. At Google, Sundar's ideas were starting to turn heads. He had suggested changes to how search results appeared, how users interacted with Chrome, how Android could be improved for developing nations. He didn't speak the loudest in meetings, but when he did, people listened. He brought something rare, a deep understanding of both technology and human need, and yet he still felt like an outsider. Until the call came. It was late. The office was nearly empty. Outside, the trees swayed gently under a full moon. Sundar was finishing a draft of a proposal for a simplified user interface for low-bandwidth users when his phone rang. The number was from India. "Unknown," he answered quickly, a man's voice. Crisp, calm, but heavy with authority. "Mr. Pichai?" Sundar straightened. "Yes. Who's speaking?" "This is a confidential call on behalf of the Ministry of Information Technology. We are reaching out to you not as a corporate employee, but as an Indian." Sundar felt his throat tighten slightly. "What's this about?" "There is a situation," the voice said. "A digital security concern involving foreign platforms and Indian user data. We're aware of your position at Google. Your insight could be helpful. And your loyalty. Expected." A pause. Sundar leaned forward. "I'm not in charge of policy decisions." "Not yet," the voice replied almost casually. "But your influence is growing. You represent India in ways you may not yet understand, and there are people watching. People who expect you to remember where you come from." The line went silent. Then a click. Call ended. That night, Sundar couldn't sleep. He replayed the call in his mind again and again. Not just the words, but the tone, the weight, the way it made him feel, not proud, not honored, but uneasy. He wrote a letter to his mother that night. Not an email, a real letter. He needed her silence more than ever, even across oceans. He wrote, "Amma, something strange happened. A call from someone in the Indian government. I don't know what they expect. I feel torn. Between the world I came from and the one I live in now. Sometimes I wonder which parts of me are truly mine." He folded the paper carefully and mailed it the next morning. At work, he didn't mention the call. He poured himself into his projects. His prototype for a new Android interface gained traction. Engineers from other teams began to ask him for advice, and slowly whispers began to circulate in the company. "Who's that guy? The one from India? He's got a mind like a mirror. No ego, just solutions." And yet, Sundar felt like he was walking a tightrope, because the call wasn't the last. 3 weeks later, another came, this time more direct. "We need access to certain search data," the voice said, "from your systems, to help with national security. This stays between us." Sundar's hands turned cold. "That's not how it works," he said quietly. "We know," the voice said. "But sometimes things work differently when loyalty is involved." He hung up, immediately. His heart pounded. That night he received an email. No subject. No signature. Just one line. "Don't forget your roots." He didn't sleep. He went to his supervisor the next day. A kind man named Julian, who wore glasses, too big for his face and always carried a paper notebook. Sundar explained the calls. Julian listened, then said, "You did the right thing by telling me." "Am I being watched?" Sundar asked. Julian gave a tired smile. "We're all being watched, but not everyone is being asked to choose sides." He placed a hand on Sundar's shoulder. "You belong here," he said. "But it's okay to carry where you came from with you. Just don't let it become a chain." Sundar nodded, but the words sat heavy in his chest. A month later, Sundar was asked to lead a team. Not just contribute, lead. It was a product that would redefine the way Android worked across devices. He accepted, not because he felt ready, but because he wanted to prove something. To himself, to his country, to his parents. He called home that weekend. His father answered. His voice was still weaker than Sundar remembered, but steadier now. "How's work?" he asked. Sundar paused. "It's complicated." His father laughed softly. "Complicated is good. Means you're doing something worth doing." Then his mother took the phone. He told her about the calls, about the pressure, the guilt, the fear of betraying either side. She listened, didn't interrupt, and finally she said something he didn't expect. "You are not a soldier. You are a builder. Don't fight. Build what the world needs." He wrote those words in his diary. "You are not a soldier. You are a builder." And then everything changed again. One morning, as he walked into the office, there was a message on the screen. Urgent. Press conference with Indian Prime Minister. Tech leaders invited. His name was on the list. He was stunned. Others congratulated him, smiled, patted his back. But Sundar was silent. A week later, he flew to New Delhi. The air was thick with humidity and news cameras. The room where the meeting was held smelled of fresh paint and microphones. The Prime Minister, sharp-eyed and calm, stepped forward. He welcomed the tech leaders one by one. When it was Sundar's turn, the Prime Minister looked him in the eye and said, "India is proud of you. But now we ask something more. Stand with us. Help us build digital sovereignty." Sundar nodded, posed for photos. But his mind was spinning. Because later, behind closed doors, a different tone returned. A senior minister approached him. "You remember those calls?" he said. Sundar nodded slowly. "We weren't asking. We were preparing." Sundar kept his face blank. The minister leaned in. "You've built systems that can shape thoughts. Make sure those thoughts don't forget the motherland." That night, Sundar sat alone in his hotel room. He stared at the ceiling fan, just like the one in his childhood home. The same slow, creaky spin, the same tired rhythm. He remembered his mother's silence, her strength, her ability to say more in what she didn't say than in what others shouted. And he realized something. True loyalty isn't about obeying, it's about protecting the truth, even when no one is watching. And that night, he wrote a letter to his team at Google, a draft of a new policy, one that would protect user data across borders. He knew it would cause waves. He knew there would be consequences, but he pressed send. And then, the edge of the labyrinth in the hours that followed Sundar's bold decision to draft a new data protection policy, one that would push back quietly but firmly against silent coercion. He expected questions, maybe resistance, maybe praise, maybe silence, but he didn't expect the message that arrived next. We need to talk. Immediately. It's bigger than you think. It came from someone he trusted. Elena. She was part of the internal ethics team at Google, sharp, intuitive, and unafraid to ask difficult questions, even in rooms full of voices trying to avoid them. Sundar had only worked with her briefly, but in those few meetings, he'd seen the same kind of quiet determination in her eyes that he'd seen so often in his mother's. They met after hours in a small glass conference room at the far end of the Googleplex. It was late. Most of the lights were off. The giant campus, usually so vibrant and alive, felt like a sleeping city. Elena didn't smile. She looked tired, serious. "They're watching you," she said without preamble. Sundar sat down slowly. "Who? Not just the government. Not just one government," she said. "There are layers to this. Your proposal, it touched something deeper than you know. You've become a symbol, not just a name on a team roster. People are building expectations around you, and that makes you dangerous." He listened quietly. Part of him had expected this, but hearing it said aloud was like stepping into a cold shower. Elena continued. "There's a file circulating, internal, confidential. It tracks influence. Yours is rising fast, and not everyone is comfortable with that." "What does that mean?" he asked. "It means the room you're walking into isn't just about code or users anymore. It's about control. Geopolitics, alliances, algorithms shaping elections, search results shifting public opinion." She leaned in, voice lower. "You're not just building tools anymore. You're shaping the future's mind." He sat back, the weight of her words sinking in. "So what now?" he asked. "You need to decide," she said. "Will you play the game, or will you change the rules?" Sundar didn't answer her then. He went home instead, walked back under the quiet California stars. The night was still, but his thoughts were anything but. In his apartment, he found the reply letter from his mother. It had arrived earlier that day, sitting unopened on his desk. He tore it open carefully, her handwriting still neat and clean. "Dear Sundar, the world will try to make you choose sides. They will offer you a louder voice but ask you to stop listening. They will tell you what matters and expect you to forget what matters to you. But remember, your strength was never in how fast you learned or how much you knew. It was in how deeply you understood the silence around things, in the spaces between words, between choices, between what is said and what is meant. You were born into noise but raised in silence. That's where your truth lives. Love." He held the letter for a long time. The air seemed to settle around him, and somewhere deep inside, a decision began to form. Not from fear, not from anger, but from clarity. He would not choose sides. He would create space. For others. For voices often ignored. For countries not given a seat at the digital table. In the weeks that followed, Sundar became more focused, sharper, not louder, but clearer. He began pushing for products designed with underserved communities in mind. Slower internet speeds, lower-cost devices, more intuitive tools for those just stepping online for the first time. Some executives resisted. "We're a business," one said in a meeting. "Not a charity." Sundar responded quietly. "We're a business that will only survive if we remain human." His proposals began getting attention. Media outlets picked up on his efforts. The story of a boy from Chennai rising to power inside one of the world's most influential companies. It became a symbol. It inspired many, but it also drew scrutiny. And then came another turning point. He was invited to speak at a global summit in Geneva. Leaders from across the world, policymakers, tech giants, philosophers, activists. The topic, the future of digital ethics. His speech was not flashy, no grand metaphors, no clever jokes, just simple truths. Technology is not neutral, he said. It carries the intentions of those who build it. It learns what we teach it, and it amplifies what we allow. He paused. So we must decide. What values do we want amplified? Convenience? Or compassion? Profit? Or people? The room went still. A few nodded. Some frowned. But after he left the stage, a quiet figure approached him in the hallway. Older, with soft eyes and a measured tone. Mr. Pichai, the man said. I represent a small coalition of nations. We've been watching your work. We believe the global digital future needs voices like yours. Would you be willing to advise us? Sundar didn't say yes. Not yet. But something in him shifted. Because for the first time, the world wasn't asking him to choose. It was asking him to lead. But just when everything seemed to be aligning, a message arrived from home. His mother had fallen ill. Not serious, they said. Not urgent. But Sundar didn't wait. He flew to Chennai the next morning. When he arrived at the small house where he'd grown up, nothing had changed. The same gate that creaked when opened, the same walls that peeled gently in the corners, the same smell of turmeric and memory. His mother sat on the old wooden bench outside, wrapped in a thin shawl. She smiled when she saw him. And for a moment, Sundar was a boy again, running home with a milk can in one hand and questions in the other. They sat in silence for a long time. Finally, she said, "They say you speak to presidents now." He smiled. "I speak. They listen sometimes." "And do you still listen?" He paused. "I try," he said. She nodded, and then she handed him something, an old folded envelope. Inside was a faded photograph. Him, at 7, fixing a broken fan. His father crouched beside him, guiding his hand, his mother watching from the doorway. On the back of the photo, written in his father's handwriting, "Teach him to build, not to break." The next day, as he packed to return to the airport, his mother walked him to the gate. "Sundar," she said. He turned. "The higher you go, the more you must remember where your feet are." He nodded, and left. But the past was not finished with him yet. 2 weeks later, during a product review meeting in California, a news alert popped up on his phone. He ignored it at first, then another, and another. Breaking. Leaked report claims major tech companies, including Google, may have shared user data with foreign governments in secret agreements. His heart sank. A document surfaced online. His name was in it, not as a suspect, not as a signatory, but as someone who refused. And now. The betrayal, the wind had changed. Inside the brightly lit glass towers of Google's headquarters, something quiet was unraveling. Too faint for most to hear, but Sundar felt it like a chill just beneath the skin. The leaked report had sent ripples across the tech world. News anchors debated ethics. Government officials sent cold emails. Bloggers guessed motives, twisting half-facts into scandal. But beneath all the noise, one truth kept returning to Sundar's mind. His name had been in the document not for complicity but for resistance, and someone didn't like that. He walked the halls as he always did, calm, present, respectful. But now the greetings were slightly slower, the smiles thinner, the pauses after conversations longer. People still respected him, admired him. But admiration could turn dangerous in a world where influence was more powerful than titles. He sat alone in his office one night, the screen of his laptop casting a soft glow across his face. The blinds were drawn. Outside, California's cold fog pressed against the windows like breath. The leaked report had confirmed what he had feared. For months, there were forces within the company willing to trade trust for power, and someone inside had tried to silence him, Not through force, through isolation, and worst of all, it was working. But Sundar wasn't angry. He wasn't scared. He was disappointed. And when he opened the internal logs, the ones that tracked revisions, access histories, and confidential committee meetings, he saw the name, Elena. The same person who had warned him, the same person who had said, "You're not just building tools anymore." Her name was linked to one of the earliest versions of the leaked file, not as its author, but as a reviewer. A shadow passed through him. Why? He confronted her the next morning, not in anger, but with quiet steadiness. They met again in the glass conference room, though this time the air between them felt colder. "Your name was on the file," he said. She didn't deny it. Instead, she looked away, then back at him slowly. "I tried to stop it," she said. "I failed." He waited. She spoke again. "There were people above me, higher than you think. They wanted you out before you got too big. You were making them uncomfortable. So you helped them?" he asked. "I stalled them," she replied. "But yes, in the end, I had to choose. They gave me a choice. Protect myself, or protect someone who didn't even know how close the walls were." Closing in, Sundar looked at her for a long time. She looked exhausted. Human. Not the traitor the headlines would have wanted. Just someone who had been backed into a corner. He said nothing. He didn't need to. And then he left the room. Over the next few days, Sundar withdrew, not out of fear, out of strategy. He stopped attending certain meetings, declined media interviews. He began to watch instead, to listen closely in rooms where others assumed he was quiet because he was uncertain. But he wasn't uncertain anymore. He was waiting and building something no one saw coming. Vision, not for one product, for the future. A plan that would change not just the way Google operated, but the way the internet itself would grow, rooted not in power, but in accessibility, transparency, and fairness. He met privately with engineers, designers, and policy thinkers, not executives, not shareholders. He asked them questions that surprised them. What if the internet didn't require English? What if search respected emotion? What if we gave more power to the user than to the platform? He wasn't pitching a product, he was planting a movement, and people began to gather, first quietly, then openly. Young engineers from Vietnam and Kenya, product leads from rural India and remote Indonesia, women coders, open source activists, and accessibility pioneers. He gave them space, not commands. And slowly, the team became a heartbeat. They named the initiative Antar, a Sanskrit word meaning inner, because this revolution wouldn't begin with power, it would begin with conscience. But the walls were watching, and they pushed back. A week before, the Antar project was set for internal review. Sundar received a summons, formal, brief, sterile, executive committee hearing, questions regarding data governance and internal confidentiality. He knew what it meant. They wanted to weaken his position, cast doubt, stall the movement. He walked into the hearing room with his shoulders steady. Inside, 5 executives sat behind a long table. Behind them, a projection screen displaying terms like trust erosion, policy deviation, and conflict of influence. They spoke in turns, using polished words to cover sharp questions. "Dao, you feel your outside interests are clouding your internal responsibilities? Have you coordinated with foreign governments without company oversight? Are you building a platform that competes with core products?" He answered simply, clearly, without defensiveness. "No. I'm building something our users already need, but haven't been given. No, I've refused all unmediated requests. No, I'm not competing. I'm expanding the definition of service." One of the executives leaned forward, voice lower. "You've become a symbol, Sundar. Symbols are hard to control." And Sundar replied, "Symbols don't ask to be controlled. They ask to be understood." The room fell silent. After the hearing, he went for a walk through the old neighborhoods of San Jose. He didn't tell anyone. He walked past stores and bus stops and small cafes, and suddenly, he saw something that made him stop. A boy, maybe 11, sitting on a cracked sidewalk with a school bag open on his knees. He had a small tablet in his hand, borrowed from a city library, trying to search for something. The screen was stuck. The internet was slow. But he kept trying. Sundar crouched down. "What are you searching for?" he asked gently. The boy looked up, surprised. "I want to know how engines work. My teacher said we can choose a project." Sundar smiled. He reached into his jacket, took out a card, and wrote something on the back. "This is a place we're building," he said. "It's not open yet, but when it is, you'll find answers there. Not just fast ones, good ones." The boy nodded, unsure but grateful. As Sundar stood up, something inside him clicked into place. This was why he was here. Not to rise, not to rule, to return. To the same kind of child he had once been. That night, he returned to his apartment and opened an email from his mother. It was short. "Do not be afraid of losing what was never truly yours. Keep your hands clean and your heart even cleaner. The world will follow eventually." He sat still, then typed one email. Subject, Antar, Global Pilot Release Message, "If we delay, now we give up the future to those who never believed in it. I say we begin," and he clicked send. The next morning, he received a message. Not from an employee, not from India, but from someone he had never expected. A world leader, not the one who had first invited him to Delhi, a rival, a voice with power and threat, and the message was clear: stop the pilot, or your family pays the price. The last choice, the message sat like a shadow at the center of Sundar's screen. 5 words, plain and cold, arranged with surgical precision. Stop the pilot, or your family pays the price. He didn't move for a full minute. The soft hum of his laptop filled the room like a warning. Outside, the California sun had started to rise, its light brushing the edge of the glass in faint orange. But inside, everything was still. So still that even the ticking clock on the wall seemed to hesitate. Threats weren't new in his world. Indirect pressure, political undertones, strategic requests. They had come and gone like shifting tides. But this was different. This was personal. And it was clear. He stood up slowly, walked to the window, and looked out across the city. The skyline shimmered in the early light. People were waking up, starting another ordinary day. But for Sundar, this morning marked the edge of everything, between surrender and something far more dangerous. Defiance. He pulled out his old phone, the one he kept only for family. He called home. His father answered. "Appa," Sundar said, steady but quiet. "Are you both okay?" "We're fine," his father replied. "Why? Has anyone visited the house recently? Asked questions?" "No," his father said after a moment. "Nothing unusual." "Good," Sundar replied. "But don't go anywhere alone, not this week. Keep the house locked, and if anything feels strange, call me." His father didn't ask questions, didn't panic, just said, "I will. But is this about what you're building?" Sundar paused. Then he said, "Yes." His father took a breath. "Then finish it." That day, Sundar went silent, not to hide, but to act. He met with no one, avoided all calls, locked himself inside a small, unused meeting room deep in the campus where no one would look. And there, for hours, he worked. Not just on the Antar project's infrastructure, but on something else. A plan not just to launch, but to protect. He knew the threat wouldn't come as a dramatic explosion or public scandal. It would come as paperwork, delays, leaked stories, whispers to the press. Stock movements. 1,000 quiet cuts. So he crafted a failsafe. He named it Vasundhara, after the Earth, the protector. It would duplicate Antar's architecture, mirror its content across global servers, and if triggered, release the code into the public domain. Open source, free, permanent. If anyone tried to shut it down, they wouldn't just lose control, they'd lose exclusivity. This wasn't revenge. This was insurance. When he finished, he encrypted the system behind one voice-activated command phrase. Amma never spoke much. 3 days later, the Antar pilot went live. Not with fireworks, not with a press release, just a quiet push of code across a decentralized network. And suddenly, users from Lagos, Manila, Dhaka, rural Gujarat, and interior Mongolia had access to a new interface. An internet that understood them, not the other way around. Native languages, intuitive symbols, fewer ads, tools for creators and students and farmers. Fast, light, and kind. The feedback came like a wave. A girl in Bangladesh who had never held a computer before posted her first artwork. A boy in Kenya accessed a biology textbook without buffering. A blind teacher in India spoke her lesson into Antar's speech-to-text tool, and her students wept when they could finally read her voice. But with the wave came the storm. Board meetings were called, emails erupted, legal flags were raised. Why hadn't Sundar sought permission? Why hadn't it been monetized? Why was the code impossible to retract, they asked. And he answered only once. Because not everything valuable should be owned. Some in power called him naive, others called him dangerous.